Perform24 family, how are you guys doing? Happy 2022. I cannot believe that this is my first video of 2022, but here we are. And we're making history here. This is the first ever late night Levi edition. I had no choice, okay? I had no choice but to film this at night. Things are crazy, okay? Things have been super busy. For those of you guys that don't know me, my actual job is running a gym. It's called Perform24 here in South Tampa. And then I make YouTube videos in my garage with my internet friends when I have time. But December and January is just one of the craziest times of the year for me. It's the only time of the year where all of our major training populations are all training at the same time. It's just the way that it works out. So our adult population is training regularly as always. Our college population, which is usually high school kids that have gone to college and then are back, those guys are training because they're back from winter break. Our high school athletes aren't going to school, so they're training a little bit more frequently. And then our off-season athletes are also in. So right now we're working with a bunch of baseball players. It's right in the middle of their off-season, and so December and January are just slammed with all those different people all in the gym at the same time. It's the only 4, 5, 6 weeks of the year where that happens. So I've been slammed, and I have not had the time to make videos like I typically do, hence the late night version. So this is definitely a test, a little bit of a test. We got the light situation going on. I don't know if it's going to work out, but I needed to get this video out, and I can't wait to talk about it because this is something that I have been nerding out on for a few months. So if you guys follow me on Instagram, which I don't promote my Instagram ever on YouTube, which is probably a big mistake, but my Instagram is just at Perform24. So if you follow Perform24, you're following me. But if you follow me there, you know that I have been slightly obsessed with the steel mace over the last couple months. And this kind of came out of nowhere, honestly. You know, the mace training world, up until the last year really hasn't been a big interest of mine. You know, all the stuff that I knew about it up until about a year ago was all the stuff that Onnit was putting out. And so Onnit was putting out a bunch of different movement flows and movement sequences and conditioning sequences and, you know, some mobility stuff. And that didn't really apply to the population group that I was training. But about a year ago, January 2021 or so, I don't know how I even found him, but I started following some of the stuff that Greg Walsh was doing. I don't know if it was a podcast or a YouTube video or something, but I started following the stuff that he was doing. And then I met him at Summer Strong at Sorinex in May. We had a quick little interaction, and I saw him doing some crazy stuff with the mace, and that kind of was another little data point to tell me oh wow, that's actually pretty crazy. Maybe I should pay attention to this. You know, throughout the summer, again, just kind of following their work. And then finally this fall, I was like, okay, I'm curious enough to get a couple of these in my hands. So I ordered a couple. I did go with the custom route. So Heather at Wolf Brigade, she customized these two maces for us. So I ordered a couple, got them in, and I've been using them literally almost every day since. So I've been using them. And then over the last couple months, I've started to sprinkle them into the programming of my clients. And then with those pro athletes in for their off season, I've also been using them a couple mace movements with those guys. So here we are. Let's talk about the steel mace. Let's talk about how I'm using this in athletic performance and how it's fitting into my programming methodology. Okay, so let's keep in mind I'm brand new to this stuff, right? And so I'm still kind of filtering all this stuff and organizing it in real time. But right now I'm thinking of the mace in kind of two separate categories. And for me, those two categories are dynamic movements where the mace is moving or swinging. There's a bunch of different swinging variations that we're using. And then the static movements. And the static movements are, you know, the mace is staying still and then the athlete is moving with that mace held firm. So let's talk about the dynamic movements first. So there's a bunch of different swinging variations with the mace. And again, I'm a beginner, right? This is brand new to me. So yes, I'm using a handful of swing variations, but I know that there are a bunch more. But we're using a lot of front pendulums, a lot of back pendulums. We are using some 360 movements. We are using the 10 to 2s that are partial 360s. Hopefully I have some video here to show you some of those. But essentially, there are rotational and there are momentum creating movements that you can do with a mace that you can't do with anything else. So talking about the baseball players that I have had in recently, most of the time that we're trying to train their rotational patterns, historically, we've always had to use a med ball, right? And a med ball is a single movement usually into the wall. You're trying to create a rotational force. You're trying to create rotational power into the wall using the med ball as like an overload. Okay, the med ball is the weight and the load that we are rotating into the wall. Well, kind of the common thread or the common thoughts over using med ball training is like if you throw a pitch or if you swing a bat, you are doing a singular movement, okay? And so let's train a singular movement 1 rep at a time, using single movements to train single movements, right? But if you think of like other athletic movements, so if you think about like a vertical jump, which is a little bit more common across all sports, you can train vertical jump in a whole bunch of different ways. You can use like an overloaded single jump, like a weighted jump, which we've all done. But you can also use reactive jumps where you're doing multiple jumps in a sequence, okay? And there are multiple strategies, training strategies to accomplish an increased vertical jump or an increased rotational power, right? But if you're using a med ball, you can only do a single rep, okay? And maybe you get a perfect bounce and it bounces back to you and you can do multiple reps at the same time. But that's pretty uncommon and it's pretty unpredictable. Well, with the mace, you can, okay? So you can get like a reactive and a dynamic movement with this mace that you can't do with anything else that I've used up to this point. So there's a reactiveness and there's a repetitiveness to some of these movements that I haven't been able to replicate with any other piece of equipment. So that is super exciting. So I have been using it for that reason. Also, the mace is just like an awkward tool. And there is like a timing component and an athleticism component to getting this thing to move where you want it to move and to do it fluidly, again, that I haven't really found any other tool that does that kind of thing. And so there is when you're swinging this mace, whether you're doing the front pendulums or you're doing the 360s, there is like a constant like ebb and flow of like strengthening your muscular system and then loosening your muscular system. And letting momentum and gravity kind of take over before you strengthen again and tighten again and swing it to the other side. That kind of like strengthening and loosening, creating power, working with momentum, that applies directly to athletics, okay? Again, if you think of like a swing or a pitch, that is a ton of movement and power creation and then also like momentum, just kind of like letting things just whip. Okay, so the kind of whip that you get in a lot of athletics, even like I wasn't a baseball player, but I was a basketball player, and I even think of like doing like reverse layups and things like that. Like there's a creation of momentum that the athlete puts into that movement, and then there's also like a flow using gravity, using momentum to kind of flip that ball up into the hoop that, you know, it's really hard to replicate in the weight room, but the mace kind of gives you that ebb and flow, and it kind of gives you that tug and that pull that kind of replicates some of those movements. So, you know, the athletes that I'm working with kind of like are drawn to it for that reason, because there is a tightening and a loosening of their muscular system that feels very natural. All right, so now let's talk about the static stuff. So when I say static, I'm talking, you know, the mace is holding still, but the athlete is moving, okay? And again, like the thing that makes the mace special is this, it's just an awkward movement. If you've watched any of my other videos, like, you know that I'm kind of, I use this sandbag kind of for the same reason. Like a sandbag is an awkward tool, and it gives you like a unique challenge, right? Well, the mace is exactly the same, okay? So if you think about like holding like a 45-pound plate in close to your chest, like most of us can hold that in close to your chest, but then if you press that 45-pound plate away from you, it's super hard to hold that steady while it's away from your center of mass. Well, it's the same concept with the mace, except it's even like exaggerated, and then you can change the angle of where that the mass is, and so there's a leverage and there's a weight distribution component that is very unique. So one of the biggest things that we've been using, or one of the most common movement patterns that we've been using is just literally a squat. And there are a couple different squat variations that we've been using, but it's shocking to me how crazy it is to just put this mace in someone's hand and tell them to squat, and they just bang out a perfect squat. I have never seen anything quite like this before, where literally there's no coaching and they just nail a perfect squat. And so I've been just like blown away, and we've been using different variations. I mean, there's a ton of different variations, and again, like I'm brand new to this stuff, and so like I'm just kind of dabbling, like dipping my toe into the mace world. But even just the few variations that we are using regularly already is pretty shocking. So the way that it just cleans up movement patterns just automatically, it's almost like squatting for dummies or like squatting 101. Literally just hold this thing like this and squat, and their angles are perfect. So, you know, if you think about like a barbell, so you can, you know, like, or different squat variations, barbell, back squat, front squat, goblet squat, all of those different angles or weight distributions or loads in comparison to your center of mass change your load angles and your geometry. And there's something about the mace, and I wish that I had like an engineering reason why this is, but there's something about the mace that just creates a phenomenal squat pattern almost across the board with all the people that I've been working with, elite athletes, beginners, and everybody in between. It's awesome. The second thing that these squat patterns are doing is that they are forcing the athletes to brace like they've never braced before. So as they're going through these movement patterns, not only are those movement patterns solid, but they are squeezing the life out of their muscular system. And if you know anything about the performance training world, bracing through movement is a gigantic priority. So essentially what that's doing is it's teaching us proper movement mechanics, but it's teaching us how to be stiff through our core, which basically, you know, in short leads to like injury prevention and longevity and all those things. So for an athlete, that is huge to learn how to brace properly through different types of movements. And there's nothing I've ever used that forces you to brace as hard as the mace during a squat pattern. And so again, this is just super exciting for me, and that's one of the reasons why I've been so obsessed with it over the last couple weeks and months. So if you guys have followed any of my content over the last year, I've talked about this in other videos, but I have a very structured sequence that all of our sessions go through, and it doesn't matter who I'm working with. We use the same exact training template for every single person that walks through our doors. But essentially, like, our training structure is a warm-up, some type of plyometric or Olympic lift, some type of primary strength block, some type of core block, some type of auxiliary block, and then sometimes some type of conditioning block, okay? So that sequence never changes. How we manipulate each one of those circuits is literally endless. And because the mace is providing me with like these different demands and these different adaptations that are forcing our people to work with, I've been finding different places within our already set training system to put these like exercises into. So I kind of think of like, I've got my primary objectives through my training phase, and then I'm kind of coming through with the mace and just like sprinkling like little mace movements into this program. And it's just kind of like connecting the dots and bringing like a cohesiveness to the whole phase that I am just pumped about. Honestly, I'm just pumped about it. So I'm finding a ton of useful, very practical application for a bunch of these different movements. And I think to just kind of sum this up best, we got to go to the source, right? So Greg Walsh of Wolf Brigade, he posted this last week, and I thought this was like the perfect summary of what I just said. And he said, different enough to be valuable, similar enough to be developmental. And I think that's so perfect because it's giving us something new to work with that we haven't seen before, and yet it's giving more spice, more life to some of the fundamentals that we already teach. And so the mace for me is just becoming like, it's shocking to me how quickly it's just seamlessly integrated into our already like ironed out training program. Okay, I'm gonna wrap this video up now. I feel like I might have gone for a while already, and I could nerd out about this stuff for a really, really long time. But I have a feeling that there's gonna be more. Okay, just the way that this thing is going, I have a feeling that I'm gonna continue to connect dots and kind of continue to draw parallels between using the Mace and just our regular training programming and our training methodology, that there will probably be a part 2 and maybe even a part 3 of this video later sometime in 2022. But for Mace Training for Athletes Part 1, I think this is a good place to end. If you want to see more, I think Instagram is probably a good place to follow me. I've been posting a ton of stuff, usually on my stories, just using the Mace and, with these pro athletes that have been in recently. But if you want to get into the Mace training, I highly suggest you follow Wolf Brigade. Follow their Instagram, follow their YouTube, follow their website. All of those platforms are insane resources. I cannot believe the amount of content, valuable content, that they've put out on YouTube that has like a few hundred views. It's psycho, honestly, about how good their content is and as little of attention as they've gotten. It's crazy. So if you're interested in this stuff, they are the masters. Greg Walsh is the man for that. If you want to buy a Mace, I would suggest using them. They've just been in this game way longer than anybody, and they've kind of figured out the dimensions and the perfect angles, and they make a very, very quality product, and they can customize it, which personally I think that's awesome. So follow those guys. I think that they are just like trailblazing. Mace training in like the conventional strength and conditioning world, in the traditional athletic training environment, it's weird. Right now, that's not a natural blend. But I see that changing very, very, very soon. So anyways, I think that they're about to blow up. I think that they are onto something. I think that I'm benefiting from that. And I anticipate continuing to learn over the next few months and over the next couple years. This is going to become a staple in my programming. But that's going to wrap up today's video. As always, train hard, live full, swing a Mace if you have one. See you in the next video. See you guys.